Hey, what's up, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in today's video. Today, I'll show you a few ways of capturing the essence of a scene. Some things that land themselves really well to watercolor, and that is smooth transitions. And I'll show you how, when you set things up correctly in the first and second wash, the second, the third, and beyond that is much, much easier. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. So we're going to paint the desert scene, the one you saw me share on Instagram and other places, a really good one, thanks to a few good things in the first couple of washes. So we'll start with the drawing stage. One thing I'm wary of is, for example, you see this rug going in and out. I don't want that to coincide with my horizon line. Okay, that's one of my kind of pet peeves with composition. Doesn't mean you have to follow it, but I like when there's a lot of lines that intersect in an interesting way. So you see the horizon intersects with the rug that intersects with another line, and that corner in the one rock, two rocks, does not intersect with the horizon line. That was very important for me. Now, the way I'm drawing this is I'm following, again, the shapes I see of the different rocks. One of the things that I found really works for me is getting the edges of a shape and using that to define the actual texture and material. So here we have a rocky texture on the ground. So these jagged lines land themselves really well to that. Now, as for the amount of details and amount of rocks, I like to get myself some kind of a pattern so that I know how to proceed. So right now I'm placing in all these rocks. The most important thing for me is that cast shadow, but I'm not filling everything up, because I know I'll come back and start adding small details here and there. Look at the focus. My head has to go real close to the painting. But because I know I'll fill in the rest with a similar pattern, I don't need to draw each and every rock. Okay, that's pretty much it. Now, this is where it gets key. This is really important in terms of the technique and how we're going to set this painting up for success. I'm actually pre-wetting the paper. And I'm using Michael Soloviev's brush. This is a beautiful one. I'll see if I can link it. If I have a link to it, I'm not sure. But if I do, I'll include it. The really important thing is I want this wash to be as flowy as possible, which is why I pre-wet. I could go wet on dry, but that will lead to some compromise in the flow. And I know I can cover the whole thing, including the cliffside, so I'm not too worried. Now, one more thing from past experience. I tend to not go dark enough in these very wet, especially wet on wet washes, so I'm going strong here. I'm going really strong with the blue, stronger than I think I'll need it to be. And as we reach the horizon line, notice how I added more water than paint. What this is going to do is create a gap between the blue and the yellow. A lot of people are always concerned about, creating greens. Look at how dark I'm going here. And you can see the way I mix on the palette too. And I want this gradual transition. I'm playing around with the angle to control the flow as I see fit. Now, as we move down, I created a buffer with some wet paint, again, to separate so that I don't get too much of a green. Okay, I'm lighting up on the blue, hoping that it's not going to move down too much, which is why I'm kind of controlling the angle, not letting it be too strongly angled. My default is about 10 to 15 degrees, so I'm playing around with it, switching from a 5 to 0 degree, all of that, mixing a bit of a warm neutral, because I don't want to switch immediately to yellow. That's another almost redundancy to make sure I don't get too strong of a green there. So the trick is either to use just water or gray. There are many ways of doing it, honestly. I've shown this in a couple of videos. And then on top of that, I'm starting to introduce a bit of warmth. One thing to note is the farthest parts are a little more gray, but that's something we'll establish in the next couple of washes. You'll see. This wash is very involved. A lot is going on, so I'm trying to just get it moving. I could start establishing the horizon line. That's a big risk because we're going to have a lot of movement because it's a very wet area. So instead, what I'm doing is working on the ground. The ground is pretty much warmth, yellows, reds, a mix of everything, and I'm trying to make it interesting. That's pretty much it. I don't go with warmth on the cliff, even though it's gonna be, or the rocks, even though it's gonna be warm, because I don't want it to blend too much into the sky. I don't want to have these weird, smooth transitions of yellow and then hard edge on top of that, which can happen quite often. But you'll see, I'm switching over yellow, blue, red. Now what you'll notice is the lower it goes, the lighter it gets. I'm not gonna really adhere to that because, you know, when things get close, we tend to see more of the color. So to me, the way I like to do it doesn't mean you should do it that way at all. But the way I like to do it is to add some strength down below. So you'll see me very lightly adding some red while it's still wet. Now, one of the things I learned to be very careful of is the color I'm adding right now has to be strong enough to endure the drying paint on paper so that it lasts. If I come back here with a watery wash, it's going to spread everything out, and I'm going to have some very strong cauliflowers in my foreground, which is something I like to avoid. Nothing wrong with cauliflowers. They're usually not that noticeable, especially once you add details, but I'd like to avoid it in this example. So this is setting us up for success. We're adding a bunch of touches of yellow and red just to keep it interesting as a first wash. Now everything is dry. And look at what I'm doing. I'm pre-wetting because I want a smooth transition near the horizon, but I'm adding just a bit too much water, so I'll have to dry it up real fast so that it doesn't awaken the previous wash. That's something that in the past I wouldn't add enough. Now it's too much. So it's something I'll have to be careful of in future paintings. When you add too much, you see it starts to awaken the wash above it, and then you're running the risk of lifting some paint back. So you almost want to balance out how wet you do this and how vast of an area you pre-wet. Okay. Now I'm going to attempt to start with a gray, blue kind of thing and slowly switch back to a warmer color. Okay. And it's the previous wash and this wash that are going to set the stage for everything else to follow. Okay, for everything else. It's that smooth transition that will contrast with the rocks and the cliff once we add those in that will make the whole thing work. It's almost like having a big idea to the painting, and my big idea for this particular one is the hard edge versus the very smooth and soft horizon. Okay, now I'm going back into some warmth because I'm going to start establishing that cliff. Trying to be as accurate as I can, but I'm very aware that my wash is drying, so I have to work fast. Plus, this is a very watery wash. Should have been a little more careful probably with the edges to set it up more for success, as I like to say in this video, but that's fine. The nuances of color are a bit hard to see here. Don't worry, it's going to get much warmer because we're glazing over a blue layer. If I had better control, I would probably do some warmth on the cliff. I just wanted to make sure that I don't have the yellow seeping into the sky. That's it. Now, what I'm prioritizing here is just getting this wash done, getting some flow. Okay, so I'm going to continue pushing forward relatively wet paint because I prioritize flow here. And in fact, we're going to have another wash and another wash establishing some values. You'll see in a second. This is a quinacridone gold orange, something like quinacridone orange. I don't remember. It's the Daniel Smith secondary palette. The paint I'm using here for warmth, together with some Pyrrole Scarlet, together with quinacridone rose, together with lemon yellow. All of my warms, the thing a lot of people ask about is, what colors to use, what combinations to use, there is no, look at this beautiful edge, by the way. Look at the beautiful edge in the cliff. There is no correct, color to use. It doesn't exist. What does exist is your vision and your photo or view or subject matter or still life arrangement in front of you. So many people are looking for an answer. There is no answer. There is only what you are trying to accomplish. Whatever you're trying to accomplish and your vision, right? Not enough people actually look at the paper and at their reference and try to vibe with it, to dance with it, to understand what they're trying to convey. You have to do that sometimes. You can paint just blindly. Even that would be better than searching for an actual solution. The solution is in the problem. The problem is you're trying to express something. That's the solution. You'll find it there. Just a flat wash to separate the foreground with the middle ground, which is the background and horizon. And now we're going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to cover the whole thing because I feel like my base color over which I'll add shadows should be a little darker. That's why I'm doing this. So it's going to be another flat wash. Now, the reason I'm showing it to you is because this one does have a bit more variety. Later on, I'm starting to add a bit more red to it. But that's just, when you look at the rocks and everything, the color that felt to me, the base on top of which I'll add the shadows, felt like it should be stronger. because then I'll run into adding shadows and not having, the highlights will be too light. It's going to be a mess. So I'm adding a bit of red, introducing it into the mix. Again, I don't have a formula for mixing color. All I have is my eyes, my brain, what I'm trying to express, right? Just look at what's going on paper. Look at it. You know, you're painting. You're not just like a drone trying to have a formula for every step of the way. It's just not going to work. If there's anything I now learn to do better, is just to rely on my instincts, and it usually leads to a result that is more unique, more me, more special, less robotic. So yeah, adding a bit of yellow, wet and wet. You saw the red up top, all of that, and I'm gonna let it dry fully. And now I'm just softening. I'm breaking off some of that line, not everything. Some of it using my blending brush. This is a Zen something and Langnickel brush. I actually have it right here. I can show you. It's a Royal and Langnickel. This one, you can find it on my gear page if I'm not mistaken. I'm just breaking off some of that line. I want it to be very hard compared to that horizon, but not too hard, just to let it breathe. It's something I like to do very often. And now we're pretty much ready to start establishing the shadows. So this is going to be a relatively complex wash still, but compared to the previous washes where the technique mattered a lot and the smooth transition, this one's going to be a little easier, but still quite complex. Okay, it's still not small details. Now, the important thing about the previous washes wasn't the technique. The technique was just a means to convey what I wanted. The most important thing is to know what you want, to see what you want. So yeah. Now, one mistake I made here was I was under the illusion that I'm using clear enough colors. I wanted to have some cools in there, like you see in the reference photo, which I edited, by the way, to get the cools to be a little bluer. And I kind of end up with a gray mix, which I wasn't planning on. So later, you will see me playing around with some opaque paint, and I think really enhancing the overall impression. But in any case, the transitions I'm trying to do here is some areas are cool, some areas are warm. So I'm using the quinacridone burnt orange or quinacridone orange light. I'm really sorry, I don't remember the color and his name, the exact name. And phthalo blue and French ultramarine kind of together. I know this looks gray. On paper, it has a lot of nuance, actually. It's just my camera. I don't know. I still haven't figured out how to really show juicy colors on camera. Maybe it's my lighting. I'm not sure. But there is some nuance. Not enough, but some. And as I move down, I'm thinking about what I'm putting inside that shape. But as I move down, I'm going to start thinking about the edge of the shape. So that's something to be aware of. Because remember what I told you with the edges and the drawing. I like to use the edges to define the texture. This relates to rocks, to sand, to fur, all sorts, to leaves even. The edge of the shape can tell a lot of the story. And it's something that a lot of people use when they figure it out, but I don't hear a lot of lessons discussed. It's also something that I talk about in the Watercolor Realism course. Check that out if you're interested in creating a realistic impression, leaving some highlights here, because the edges are not discussed enough to convey a texture or realism. So that's something you may want to look into. I will put a link below. Watercolor Realism course, especially if you got the frustration-free watercolor course and you liked it, and you feel like you are now able to be as loose as you want. I think it's a good completion to that. Now we're getting to the edges. It's very important for me to get these nuances of the rocky texture there. So you'll see me playing around with the edge a lot and being a little more careful. This includes leaving some almost peninsulas of highlights. You'll see here. You see this kind of a peninsula thing, or also breaking into the lit area. Now, I know this, again, looks strong. Trust me, when it dries, it's going to fall into place. I'm actually following the values I see quite closely, and they do make sense. You know, on the other hand, maybe if you want to show more clarity in the shadows, you'll end up making everything lighter, which I discussed in the previous video, making the entire painting higher key, meaning very... keeping the relative value, so if this is the difference, but making everything light or dark together. That's what I mean when I say high key. Some people got confused by that, which is understandable. I didn't explain it enough. But if that's my darkest, if that's a mid value and that's a light, I'm keeping the relations between them the same, but I'm making everything lighter or everything darker, thus maintaining the realism while showing more of the color. Because a lot of colors have the strongest vibrancy point or saturation point. When you look at their darkest to lightest iteration, the one that feels most colorful is not the darkest, it's somewhere in the middle. And this point will change for different colors. So we're done with the main shadow, and now we're moving on to some of the secondary shadows. I'm going to start with the ones I drew and then slowly start introducing more of them in. As I mentioned, I didn't draw each and every rock. There's no reason to do that. Now, one more thing I'm thinking of is still temperatures. Some areas of the shadows are meant to be cooler, others are warmer. It will really depend on the scene and what you're trying to convey. Sometimes the shadow on the ground will be warmer, and the shadow on the rock, there's a rock and then it casts a shadow. The shadow on the rock may be cool and then the ground is warm, or vice versa. It could be the shadow on the rock is warm and the shadow on the ground, believe it or not, can be cooler. It will really depend on the situation. You'll see this in a few seconds when I add some warmth next to coolness, a bit lighter. It will be more obvious, and in this final scan, it'll be clearer as well. But a lot of people are scared of these details. They're afraid they'll add too many details. When in reality, I find that a lot of it is just about, paying attention to what's going on. So right now it feels quite empty, which is why I knew I'm going to have to add a lot more. But look at these, the fact that the shadows go like this, they're very horizontal in the sense of they match the direction of the ground. So it's not fully horizontal. You'll see it that way probably. It's not fully horizontal. It's diagonal, but it's not like this. Yeah, this is very important. The shadows have more of a diagonal horizontal pattern to them. Okay, now look at this spot. I'm using a bit of warmth, and next to it, I'll introduce a bit of coolness. And look at how beautifully the two interact. So I'm doing a cool cast shadow and a warm shadow on the rocks themselves. One more thing is, in the process of darkening this layer, I lost a bit of the lightness on the rocks. So, and it is important for me to convey that too. So you'll see me using plenty of opaque paint to bring back some of these. You'll see that in a few seconds. But in any case, to me, this is a fun part because it's very controlled, almost like drawing. You don't have to worry too much about getting the wash to flow really well and all of that. Things that were great concerns in the first few washes. And by the way, if you look at the cliff now and compare it to the horizon, that's the effect I was going for, right? Very hard edges next to very smooth blended edges in the background. I think that's a really fun thing to show, right? Other times I might have chose to show it a different way. One more thing to bring into the equation is think about the way the size of the page and how it dictates the technique. Because if I were to paint much larger, like 4 times this size, it would have been much harder to get some of these effects, but the mistakes wouldn't be as visible from afar, so you don't actually have a problem there. So it's a give and take. The smaller the sizes, the more I can kind of rely on the technique. Not just rely, but have it show more directly, I would say. Now, I used some spray from the sprayer to add some of these details not too harshly, especially in the farthest part of the foreground. We're still in the foreground, right? It's this foreground, middle ground is the horizon and kind of the ground, the land, and then the sky would be maybe the background. In the foreground, still, we have elements that are more out of focus. And I want to show that. Plus, it's a good way of adding details without it feeling too repetitive. I'm spraying a bit of paint like this, just smacking the brush tapping it on my finger, and that's what you get. Sometimes I'll pre-wet, then do this. Sometimes I'll do this, then wet it with a sprayer. But the idea is, if you're scared of doing all of these dots and details for the rocks, and you feel like you overwork it, sometimes it's due to the edges. Once again, we go back to the edges. Sometimes that's the culprit there. Now, I'm also adding variety of colors. So you saw me mixing a bit of a red, kind of neutral orange red, just to show all of my primary colors in the rocky details. I love to show all of my primary colors if I can. I love to show a bit of yellow, a bit of blue, a bit of red, that is totally my personal taste. It's something I learned with the years that I enjoy doing. It's something that I learned about myself. Not everyone's gonna have that. Some paintings don't have that too. If you look at a lot of my paintings are more dominant with the warm and cool, and it's more nuanced in terms of color. Everything is more gray to saturated, and that's the play there. But yeah, that's usually how these things work for me. So yeah, dotting these all in, trying to figure out, where my balance is, right? There is no correct balance. There is only your balance. There's only your thing. And whether you find it or not, it doesn't really matter. If you're so caught up in doing things the right way, which there is no such thing, you'll end up doing it the wrong way always. Which is, again, there's no such thing too, but you just won't get the result you aimed for because you aimed for something that was way off to begin with. Now I'm using my Joan Brilliant Chinhan PWC color to add those highlights I told you about. I actually like to take advantage of the fact that the paper is still moist so that not only the shadows are blurry, but also the highlights. If I can, I may spray on it to loosen it up a bit, but I'm riding the wave right now of just making sure that I'm aware of where it's currently the paper is wet. Some areas I won't have to blend it, especially for the rocks that are very close to us. I may want to show it more boldly, but especially for everything that's more peripheral, more towards the back, more towards the sides, I'm going to keep these quite loose. But look at how it already gives it some flair of balance of light and shadow. I would say it's starting now to get into balance. And I'll just continue dotting these in. In terms of just zooming out a bit, macro process, the really only thing that's left is to add more of these and to start bringing out more details in the cliff, which will entail using highlights, using colors, and that's pretty much it. And you'll see this process right in front of your eyes. Now, these highlights look a little strong, but remember, with opaque paint, it works the other way around. It looks light, it dries darker. Unlike normal paint that looks dark, dries lighter. It's just that the paint dissipates and gets absorbed, so less of it is seen. So if you're using a light white opaque paint, more of it is absorbed, it turns darker. Okay, that's just how it works. Because you see more of the layer underneath, pretty much. So yeah, so don't worry about if it looks too abrupt. Worst case, you can spray some water on it, and it will make it a little darker. But you can start light and then figure these things out. I'm adding a few of these shadows to the border, right, of that shadow over there. That was a good touch. Now I have mixed in some more of this opaque paint. It's on the warm side, but I'm adding more orange to it, you see, trying to give it some color. That's something I've shown many times before, but, in case this is the first time you see it, I am a big fan of mixing opaque paint that is white with colors to give it more of a variance. This could be seen almost as painting with gouache. In fact, maybe I should try just painting with gouache. Will make my life a lot easier than using opaque watercolor paint. I'll probably get into that at some point. But yeah, by the way, if you can take a moment, like this video, I would really appreciate it. If you have questions, feel free to drop them below. These things really help the video gain more views, so I really do appreciate that. If you're unsubscribed for some reason, now's the time to subscribe and hit the bell button to receive notifications when I go live and all of that good stuff. So yeah, indicating some of these shadows. Some of it is almost dry brush-y in the technique, which I like a lot. This is just more of the same. It's quite a repetitive process, but that's where people lose their patience and they think, oh, this doesn't look right, that doesn't look right, I did too much of this, too much of that. Where instead of being so caught up in the plan or whatever you want, I haven't finished yet, by the way, I'm just prematurely signing it as always. Instead of being so caught up in that, just look at what's going on paper. You'll find the answer there. So now I'm mixing a lot of phthalo blue and French ultramarine with designer's gouache. This is white. The color is, because I keep forgetting to mention it, it's called permanent white. Okay, it's pigment white 6 PW6. This is by Winsor Newton. It's called Designer's Gouache. And it's a great, more flowy, by the way, talking about flowy gouache, paint to mix with. So I mix it with my watercolors freely, and we'll start putting in the cliffs. Now, this may be too light. Remember, it's going to dry darker, but I'm not sure at this point. So what I do to test it out is, in a second, you'll see I'm establishing some shapes, and then I'll use my hairdryer to quickly dry it and see if it looks right or not, and based on that, I'll continue. But these are meant to give it some color, some more saturation around the focal point. There are pretty much an endless ways of making the focal point the focal point, by using strong contrasts, by using bold shapes, by using strong saturation, all of that. Here, I'm introducing to the already strong contrast another element. Let's dry this, see what it looks like. I'm introducing another element, which is colors. I'm exaggerating the temperature differences. So if something was just a little cool, I'm making it much, much bluer and cooler. Something was a little warm, I'm making it much more fiery and warm. It's going to look strange at first, but trust me, when you'll see the end result, it's going to make a lot of sense. I had some inspiration for that, because I often ask, if I have any artists that inspire me. I try not to expose myself to too much other people's arts, because I don't want my because I don't want my style to be influenced by external. I don't want my style to be limited by external influences. But I did obviously see a lot of paintings before, and still do from time to time. And I will say John Singer Sargent watercolors in particular, but also oils, were and still are some inspiration to me. The way he brings out temperature in watercolor is, to me, magnificent. It's so fun to see. And this is why I'm trying to incorporate some of that in me. Don't get me wrong, it's perfectly okay. There is no right or wrong. You can get inspired by other artists. You can do whatever you want. In fact, inspiration does have some strength to it. At the end of the day, for me, I don't want to be swayed in terms of style. I love when the inspiration makes me want to paint, makes me want to draw, though I don't really need external inspiration. I just enjoy it so much. But, it's fun to see a painting and then it gets you going and wanting to paint yourself. But when it comes to the way I like things to look, I'm wetting the paint more to make it easier to use. When it comes to my style, I would not want it to be contaminated by anything else as much as I can. I'd like to keep it my own. So here we go, adding some of these. We are really close to finish. We're about 2 minutes or a minute and a half away from this process being done. Now, again, it may look too light. In the context of things, it's going to dry much, much nicer. Things are going to balance themselves out. And the main idea, the way we set ourselves up for success, is that horizon. It's so beautiful. I love, love, love the way it looks. That's the thing that carries the painting for me, and I really, really enjoy. But yeah, I'm gonna loosen it up a bit with some spray. That's how I like to do it. I'll play around with it until it looks right. Then I'll use a tissue or maybe something to smoothen it out a bit. Opaque paint is much easier to smoothen out with water because it just stays on the surface sometimes. And I'm gonna do the same probably for some of the highlights above. I'm actually not sure. I think that's just me adding that red. I should get some opaque, some gouache. I think I really should start incorporating pure gouache into my watercolors and take them to the next stage, the next evolution. Because I enjoy this process a lot. I just don't enjoy starting to paint with, look at how it dried perfectly. I just don't enjoy painting directly with opaque paint. So, gouache seems like a good step. Here we go. You'll see some bleeds under the tape. That's fine. You're going to put some Passepartout kind of frame around it. When you frame it, doesn't really matter. Here we go, end result. Really enjoyed this. Had to bring back some of the blues because they escaped in the scatter. My scatter hates blues. But in any case, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Leave a like, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to check out the courses if this style speaks to you. Frustration-free watercolor course if you haven't checked it out yet, and a watercolor realism course. And this is pretty much it. Let me know in a comment down below. Is there anything you learned from this that is meaningful, you feel like? Is there anything that in it that inspired you? I will see you in the next video. Until next time, take care.